And I've asked them to really address a couple of questions dealing with collaboration to get us started, but then I'd like to emphasize that this should really be a discussion. So I really welcome, we really welcome your questions and comments and sort of participation in the spirit of collaboration. So one of the things that I, as an academic, have experienced in the last probably 5 to 8 years in particular, has been an emphasis on collaboration as a part of a requirement for grants, successful grant applications, for developing inter-university programs, right? I mean, we hear this word a lot. You really need to collaborate. And it's also promoted as something that we should be teaching, that we should be encouraging with our students. So one of the problems with that is nobody really tells you what that is, basically. So lots of, here, you need to collaborate, do this. What I've noticed is that a lot of it's been more coordination, not collaboration. So coordinating parts of a project, but not really being open to a very real, raw, sometimes embarrassing, sometimes challenging discussion of how to work together to achieve an end, which is really what you're trying to do when you're collaborating. So the spirit of this discussion is to be a little raw, a little open, right? If we can pull the bandages off so that you can see, and we can talk about some of those issues more directly, not so much a kumbaya, yay, we're happy we can collaborate, but really, what are the real challenges of doing that? Because as you can see from the projects that we've seen thus far in the conference, collaboration is critical to making this kind of science happen. It's research, education, whether it's with library science and promoting issues with the public, collaboration is becoming critical for us to be able to address the kinds of challenges we're facing. So it's not really an option. I still have colleagues who prefer to spend time in their office working alone. I respect that. I have no issue with that at all. But I can see that they are more and more left out of the discussion at the university in terms of the big challenges that are receiving the funding and that are receiving the recognition. That is one of the critical issues that we face within the academy, which is what I know best. But I've asked all of us to come up here and kind of address it from our various points of view within the academy and within our own disciplines and areas. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn to Ross, let him do a little introduction of himself, and then maybe address one of the questions. Okay,
sure.
Perfect.
Thanks, Elise. My name is Ross Didnt. I'm a systems programmer at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I work at an interdisciplinary research institute. Systems programmer, what does that mean? So just software development, hardware, maintenance of our cave system and other VR technology we have there. Yeah, so in the institute very much encourages collaboration, tries to support it, and that's sometimes successful, sometimes not, but we can get into that a little bit more as questions continue. I guess one of the projects, one of the questions I was asked to address would just be a description of a project you did that incorporated collaboration, and one that comes to mind is a project we did with a astrophysics related research group on campus. They're known as the Wisconsin Ice Cube Particle Astrophysics Center. So this is the group that conducts neutrino research. Has anyone heard of the Ice Cube Research Lab in Antarctica by chance? So this was a particular project. We've done several projects with them now, but it all started out back in like 2013. The visit from one of their education and outreach managers to our facility. And we connected. We had them in during an event we host called the Researchers Open House, which basically is the idea we open our doors, turn on all of our technology, encourage people to stop by, which is often more difficult than it sounds because we're located in the lower level behind like 2 doors of locked security. So there's more coordination that has to happen for that to always happen easily. But they did come check it out, and we showed them some demos. Then they instantly had some ideas on how could we bring in some neutrino visualizations into the cave. And we started out and with an internally funded project through them, and developed a visualization that lets you see neutrino events in our cave system, and you're 2 miles down underneath the Antarctic ice sheet, and you can play back those events, and then you can fly up to the top of the ice sheet and see a 3D model of the ice cube lab. So kind of a cool little project. Again, a couple students worked on it, but also at the same time incredibly challenging. The notion of the concept of neutrinos are just really hard for people, for me, it was a lot difficult for a lot of people to get their heads wrapped around it. But we since done some projects with them after that, and yeah, I thought overall it ended up being a pretty successful collaboration.
Hello, my name is Amy Danich. I'm an associate professor in computer science at the University of Wyoming. So my research area is 3D user interaction for virtual reality, immersive visualizations, and virtual humans. And so the very nature of my research involves me looking at other individuals' problems and how they're able to interact with their applications, or maybe they don't have an application yet, and what would that interaction look like? And so by that very nature of that research involves me having to go out and collaborate with a lot of different types of individuals. So I've collaborated with individuals from nursing, from car manufacturing, neuroscience, art, and from a variety of different institutions, from industry, startups, both startups and more established industry, as well as government and academia. And so one of the things I think it's important is just not to kind of pick out collaborators just because you need a collaborator to apply for a grant, but to kind of open yourself up to the potential of collaboration. So I think, making sure that I guess I can answer one of the questions. One of the questions is looking at, what are the challenges in collaboration? And I think trying to find that intersection point to where, where that kind of that magic happens. And it's hard. I've had unsuccessful collaborations where individuals have just put my name on their form or whatever it was and haven't talked to me at all from that day. And that's probably the extreme side of bad collaboration. But there can also be collaborations that don't involve a lot of communication, and that can not go well either. But on the more successful side of collaborations, I found is where you don't pigeonhole somebody as doing X and you have a dialogue. So you really try to listen to what their interests are and what they're trying to do, and prompt questions that will kind of elicit more information about what they're doing. And that takes time. And then also expressing kind of what you're interested in as well. Because a successful collaboration, I feel, is one that both or all parties involved have some benefit to that collaboration. Maybe it's not 100%, but maybe there's something that you gain from that. But then, that in that collaboration that you're not just limiting yourself, but you're kind of opening up to the possibility, well, what if we brainstormed about this together and really kind of talked about this and come up with ideas together based on our different expertise. And I think that's where you'll have that intersection, because that's the whole point of collaboration, having that diversity of thought, the diversity of expertise to find that intersection point. And so one last comment I'll make. So as you mentioned, don't just stay in your office and hide in there. So I have a funny anecdote. So I'm a little bit of an introvert, and so I have to force myself to go and talk to people, and I do that every day. So one of the more successful collaborations, so I started collaboration with University of Colorado Boulder, and one of the things that I said to myself when I went down there, I said, I am not going to hide in an office. Don't give me an office, because I don't want to hide there, because that's what I'll do. I'll go hide. And so they kind of gave me access to the various labs. And so I would sit in a lab or rotate around the different labs. And boy, was I surprised of how cool some of the projects came out of that collaboration. We're currently working on those, but just to have that intersection, that daily dialogue with students and faculty and not hiding away. So
I want to, before, just one second, because I want to come back around to two issues you talked about. One, brainstorming. So just remember that to talk about how to get that started. But before we do that, and before Nate introduces himself, how many introverts do we have in the room? Everybody who knows that they're an introvert? Okay, so well, maybe right. It doesn't have to do with shyness. It has to do with where you recharge your battery, right? And it actually shows it's the predominant. So this is weird. In general society, particularly in the US, it's dominated by extroverts, right? So the majority of people in the US fall into the extrovert category. However, if you're in academia, research, in the government, right? If you're in a more particular specialized area, you'll start to see the introverts dominate. And this is exactly the issue, right? Is that introverts want to be alone to sort of process and think. And so being able to figure out strategies for kind of getting us to, because believe it or not, I'm an introvert also, getting us to come out of the room and deal with other people is a really interesting one. So I want to circle back to brainstorming though too, and thinking about that in the same context of being an introvert and how you sort of get the brainstorming process started. Nate.
Yeah, I'm Nate Newsome, VR researcher and developer at Clemson. For those of you who saw my talk this morning, I kind of have a strange role where I'm split between an innovation center where collaboration is one of our pillars, and it's what the whole building was designed around. And then also at this Institute for Packaging Design and Graphics, developing training systems. So in both positions, I'm constantly working with people who are not from a computer background at all. So part of my job at the Innovation Center is connecting with anyone on campus who wants to bring VR or AR into their research or their classrooms. And that's spun off of a few collaborations, and I think a lot of the biggest challenges I face with it is trying to help them understand what we can do with VR and what there's just a vast array of things that you could possibly do. And usually when I'm talking with someone who wants to get into VR, they want to do it all. And that may not be reasonable depending on the situation. So when I echo some of the same things, a lot of the collaboration process there for me is really digging in and understanding what they need, what they're looking for in their work. And a lot of the times they don't really know what they need as far as how that can play into using VR or some other kind of visualization tech. So it's two-sided, where I have to explain as much as I can without overwhelming them, and try and figure out if there's good places where we cross over.
But you're talking about acting in a sense as a kind of consultant in that role, right? More in that sense. So those are slightly different positions, right? To be a consultant versus someone who's trying to develop partners for different disciplines. So they're coming to you and saying, okay, so
Right.
do you brainstorm in that situation? Do you sit down with them and sort of brainstorm through
Absolutely.
that? Okay. And what does that look like?
So the latest example is we've been trying to get someone from the College of Forestry and trying to get them to come over and play and see what kinds of things they can get into. And a lot of them are very traditional. A lot of their research and their work is a lot of pen and paper work and a lot of field work. We finally had one PhD student who was really interested in trying to figure out what he could do with AR and VR, and he was explaining the concept of AR and VR without really knowing at all that they existed or were possible to do. So he was really interested in and had these great ideas of trying to bring more attention to our experimental forest that we have on campus, and trying to raise awareness about some of its purpose and things that are going on. And he had no idea about anything VR, AR, so we spent a few days just kind of going back and forth, learning about what he's doing, what he needs from this project, and then spent a lot of time me just taking him through, showing various examples of different work, and letting him experience a lot of that. And ultimately, we circled around that maybe he doesn't need to use VR specifically. It actually came back to him needing to kind of rethink exactly who his target audience is and what he needs to, what kind of message he's trying to get across. And I find a number of times, a lot of the times they just want to use the tech because it's cool, which is great, but getting them to understand or to think about why they want to use it, if it's just because it has that wow factor and the buzzwords in it for right now, or if that technology is right for the application they're trying to make.
Same question to you, Amy and Ross. So brainstorm, what does it look like when you like that first day that you're getting together with a group that, you're thinking, oh, we've got a project, or we think we have a project. How does it start?
I can go in a little bit. So a lot of it is a strong sort of series of communication meetings back and forth with the people in a development. We have a development lab space, and we primarily use that for development, but also for meetings with external groups and campus researchers. And just one project that comes to mind most recently, where we really spent a lot of time in there, was another IceCube related VR experience project that was we are actually close to having released on the Oculus store. But there was a lot of whiteboard sessions, trying to meet expectations that the researchers have, both in terms of accurately portraying either their research mission or some data that they have, while at the same time being able to do so in a way that adheres to the constraints that exist when trying to develop a 3D experience. So a lot of that involves just communication, learning each other's language, which in this case was quite challenging, but I think with enough patience and kind of a general group collaborative spirit, it can be done in almost any situation.
Okay, so I would agree it's over a series of conversations, not just a single conversation. But I would also comment that there's both formal brainstorming and informal brainstorming. And I found, so with informal brainstorming, I look at that as, okay, I've learned something new about what this person's doing, or about their work, or maybe about them in general, and it kind of sparks something that maybe that I was working on, or that they don't know about. And so that could be through a research talk or something like that. Or I found lightning talks are really enlightening as well. And so then that kind of sparks a discussion that, hey, I realize you're working on X. This is what I'm working on. Let's see if we could kind of get together and talk about these things, or I'm working on the same thing. Let's work on this together, something like that. So that's more informal. More formal brainstorm might be kind of getting together, try to elicit some of that. So, I ask them questions like, okay, tell me about your research work, or tell me what you're working on now. Tell me about some of your past projects. So I just try and learn as much as I can, or what are you interested in with X? And then I'll try to also express things that I've been working on, things that I'm good at, that I'm not good at, in terms of expertise, and try to find an intersection there. But there's also formal brainstorming tools that you can use. One of them being kind of looking at a particular problem and then just coming up with all possible solutions and do it as a group, where you put up all those solutions either on sticky notes or something like that, and just throw all those ideas out there. So you kind of expand, and then you kind of funnel your ideas down, where you're working together towards a solution rather than saying, I'd like to do X, can you help me with it? That's a great way to promote some of the things you're interested in, but it doesn't necessarily find a shared solution where you're coming up with a solution together. So there's a variety of different methods.
Yeah, I mean, I've found over, that really works well, the second one that you're describing, when you're sort of, hey, we want to attack a particular challenge, that you develop a team that does that, which I think is an idea related to collaboration that we don't often kind of tease out, right? We say, well, it's going to be, yes, we want to do something together, so we collaborate. But actually, I found that you have to develop those teams over time. You have to learn a shared language, and it's likely not going to happen the first, the second, the third time you get together, but somewhere later down the line that you're able to, as a group, figure out how to manage input so that you can be effective, basically. So I think it's this idea of it taking a fair amount of time to develop this is something that we're often not aware of. You think, I can do it really fast and it'll sort of work out, and that's not really the case. But the other model where somebody's coming to you with a problem, or where it's a kind of one-on-one, that'll work a little differently, basically, and that's possible to do maybe in a shorter amount of time, and it doesn't require, it requires the same amount of time investment to do the project, but the communication changes, basically. Has everyone here sort of collaborated with other people? And yeah,
I just have a question. I mean, I come from the education background, and I teach teachers how to teach. So I teach science methodists how to teach science, but I embed technology. And when you're collaborating, do you ever have that conversation of, how is this technology going to substitute what's happening? Is it going to modify the learning experience or your field experience? Are you actually going to be using this in another lens? Like, it's the SAMR model. I mean, it's well known in the education field. What is it about that technology that you want in order to get to your outcome that you're looking for, either for research or for learning? Like, that's something that I think that would help facilitate your conversations. I mean, we really believe in backward design models, but I didn't hear any of you say that this is kind of like the conversation. Where's that substitution of technology facilitating the outcome that a researcher wants?
In a particular example on our end, we were working with this polar research group, and we ended up actually borrowing from one of their existing informal teaching methods that they employed, where people were basically asked to identify, it was this activity that kids would do where they'd try to figure out which direction a neutrino was passing through their detection array. And in order to do so, they would basically try to look at a picture, I believe, and then draw, like, look at a top, a side, and a front view of the array and see, look at the different propagation that's happened in the array, and then try to figure out, okay, which direction did it come from. So it's meant to be kind of a fun thing, but just a something they did for an informal
You're
science.
kind of like augmenting their
Yeah, so what we ended up doing is actually taking that and adding it into a multi-touch table exhibit style thing. And then the technology in this sense, then we then place that up on the main floor of the building so that anyone at any point in time could go play this game and try to discover the neutrino direction, you know. So in this case, the technology ended up making it more accessible, because prior they would only do this at particular events, like formal learning events. So that I guess that's an example that resonates, where the technology is making it a bit more accessible.
It's enhancing.
Yeah.
Probably unique.
Yeah, the example that comes to mind for me is the print training system we're trying to build right now. And what we're trying to do is kind of augment that initial training process. And so I'm in a lucky position where I'm actually embedded in the institute that is teaching our students, and I can walk downstairs, go straight into the print room and ask. My main question is, what do you find difficult to learn when you're just working with the actual equipment? So there's a lot of internal mechanisms that are difficult to see while a press is running, or really tiny. So the dots on each plate that print each little dot of color. There's a lot that goes into how those are formed and how they're deformed as they're pressed down. There are a lot of tiny details that you can't really show on a press as it's working. So we're trying to focus on those pieces, and we're also trying to stay away from anything that requires a feel or something that would be better suited to actually be on that equipment. So we're trying to focus on the parts of VR that allows you to play with those things and really try and help them understand on a deeper level.
So other questions. So you can hear that we're really talking about two or multiple kinds of collaboration. One collaboration, we're trying to develop how you're going to use a particular technology. The other just maybe a collaboration that addresses a basic research problem or addresses a basic problem. And it's important to identify the difference, right, approaches. But if I could just open it up and ask people to potentially share, one or the other experience. I mean, I can start similarly to Amy. I think I come from the second one, which is really trying to collaborate with fellow researchers. And I remember my first experience at this was sitting around a table of 20 or so people, and we were talking about the word sustainability. And you would have thought that would be pretty straightforward. Sustainability, everybody knows what that means. Well, it turns out that every discipline has a different definition for sustainability. Voila. So all of a sudden, it was this really seemingly impossible conversation where somebody would say something, you're like, I hear the words, but I'm just not quite getting it because I already have my assumed meaning for that. So it took us a good 3 or 4 meetings as a group to just come to the agreement or a way to talk about one concept, sustainability, right? To be able to hear the various definitions and to understand how they might be applicable. The next thing we faced was like, so applied to what? I mean, this was not insignificant, right? If you're talking about dealing with this issue in the built environment or in the environment, which is what it was for all of us, at what scale did that operate? So then trying to figure that out was kind of the next thing. So it took just a lot of meetings just to define terminology and to really work through the basic problems. And at any point, I think we could have given up there could have been a sort of, wow, this, and there were people who even dropped out of that group who just said it's not, you know, I'm not getting anything from it somehow. But for those of us that stuck it out, it ended up being, at least it was for me, a kind of game changer. I found I really didn't want to work differently after that. Like, this was really the way I wanted to be able to talk about ideas with a group of people and work through them to achieve some kind of mutually understood or beneficial solution. So if we could just open up, do you have experiences of collaboration that have worked or not worked for that you might want to talk about? Imogen.
Yeah, 2 comments if I may. The first is that I'm with Amy on this one with regards to not wanting an office to hide in. So I've been my office is situated in the laboratory right in the middle of the biz centre, and I've been offered an office elsewhere. Quieter, a bit nicer, a bit more natural light, and I've thought, well, no, I need to be in here and I need to be accessible. I don't always want to be as accessible, but I am accessible, and I know ultimately it's going to work better for everybody. So I put that greater need above my immediacy of interest of sometimes just being quiet and getting on with it. And then with regards to collaborations, a project I was working on, I'm still working on. When I moved to the institution, I needed to find some new collaborators to play ball who could help advise and guide and really get in on this project. So I went out and looked at what I thought were the right people, and the ones I approached were interested and said all the right things, and we all wrote all the right things down, and then nothing happened. And then I flew back into Lomé one night, months later, on the last flight, and I got sitting next to somebody on the aeroplane who was wanting to be extra chatty at 9 o'clock at night. I wasn't delighted, but I did it. And 2 years later, we've got a great collaboration. We've written IRBs together to move this research forward, and everyone's bought in for the right reasons. And it was, I've often thought what went wrong the first time was on paper it looked great, and the second one, I nearly didn't take the opportunity of conversation, and I would have missed out on something that's been groundbreaking in the collaboration.
So what was it? Did you ever figure out what didn't work with the first one?
First one, there was also, I think there was the size of the collaboration didn't help.
Uh-huh.
I tried to tick too many boxes and got somebody or some group in on everything. And it went from being this, intimate couple of people that you can talk around coffee and get everyone together or get them all on the phone call to suddenly an 8 to 10 group thing that was going to be a doodle poll disaster of just trying to get everybody to meet. And the second one, I think it was just one of those, the stars aligned, right place at the right time, all the right skills and mutually beneficial interests to each other's research areas. There was more in it for everybody. There was maybe only enough in it for me on the first one. That's
actually, I think, a really critical thing. Skin in the game. You have to have something in the game. This is also true when you're mentoring someone. This is something that's come up in a lot of discussions about mentoring versus advising. So advising is, I can just give you advice, right? And I don't have an expectation, and you don't have an expectation. But if we decide to go into a mentoring relationship, then there's actually an obligation on both parties' part to commit. So if I'm going to mentor you, I also expect for you to deliver. You can't just come to me and spend an hour every couple, months, right? And walk away. I'm actually expecting that, no, if I'm in this, you're in this too. And that's what I think it really works with the research, right? With the sort of collaboration when there's skin in the game on all parties. No, I'm giving this time, everybody is giving something in the process, basically. Yeah, I think that's a really important thing. Yep. Sarah.
So if I could take skin in the game and say one thing I learned is to put emotions in the game. Our space is designed really more as a venue than a tool, and so we've had to help people see it as a community asset. And so we failed remarkably in the beginning by showing off technology because people would walk out saying, that's amazing, and we have no use for it. And so I took one comment, which was, that was like Disneyland, to think, okay, people want to be on the ride. And so I can speak to their head or their heart, and speaking to their heads hasn't worked here. So I've started approaching initial conversations like, what's the mood you're trying to convey? So this isn't talking about convening collaborative spaces. What's the mood you're trying to convey? How do you see people interacting? And really going to basic fundamental emotional language. And then from that, we've had some of the greatest success in kind of co-collaborating, co-creating, brainstorming. How do we then take these tools and assets we know exist in the room as embedded technology, and then meet the emotional ride that someone may be envisioning. And that's been a great success out of a pretty fantastic failure.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that's right. Don't always forget that there are different ways to articulate, to verbalize what you want. I'm sure that you guys run into that, especially when you're dealing with the people coming in raw, don't know anything about VR, and you have to figure out how to get to what they're interested in doing. Yeah. So let me just throw this out. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just gonna say, I'm coming from a slightly different perspective because I'm a subject matter expert. I'm the anthropologist, and I'm a technological novice. And so when I started the project we'll talk about later today, I went to someone who is an excellent, who has excellent skills, and I talked about a project that I'd like to do because I didn't have it, and luckily he had a very wide vocabulary, and he was very open-minded because I had not had the language nor the technological sophistication to know what was possible. I'm in a completely different world, and so I approached him with one project. But as we talked, I learned that there are all kinds of things possible that I had no concept of, and that problems that I didn't think could be solved with technology could very easily be addressed. And so part of the successful collaboration, or the beginning of the successful collaboration was kind of giving up the ego and admitting how much I didn't know, and letting someone fill in those gaps, and then starting the brainstorming.
Yeah.
And it started from a much more useful space.
Yeah, that's a super hard thing to do in our profession. Admit you don't know it. Definitely, but really valuable. I always remember, and Napoleon was known for doing that. He would walk in, he had no clue what was going on, and he'd say, "Explain to me what I need to know," and that was remarked upon again and again in journals by people who'd observed him in meetings, essentially. So yeah, really valuable tool. Ross, or Kyle.
The other perspective, because I find that the best collaborations that come in, so we're a service center, and I'm not sure that I like that terminology because I would prefer it to be collaboration. But when a subject matter expert comes in, I don't know anything about what they're talking about, which is something for me. And so if we both are sort of in that situation with the same humble perspective, I think it's a lot of fun because I get to learn their topic and they get to see it animated in some way they didn't expect. I think that's kind of an ideal scenario.
Great. All right. I think we are. John.
No, I was just gonna.
Sorry. Thanks, Bill.
The ownership of the skin game aspect. I just became in charge of the visualization lab at IL. We're taking it into a completely different direction where it was before, so I'm sort of starting anew, and all my mentors suggested that everybody's got to have ownership in what the vision is. And as I've practiced those are the paths where I've seen to be most successful.
So one last thought as we wrap up, and thank you to the panelists for sharing your experiences and to all of you for participating. But think about how similar or different the people are that you're working with on any given project to you. Are you working with people that are very, very different from you? Or are you working on people who are more similar, And would it be useful to try and identify that and think about how to, reach out to different people or to reach out to people who are more similar? In other words, we each have a different working style. We tend to like to work with people who are more similar, but in order to reach out farther, it's really useful to think about working with people who are really different, which is kind of what you were saying about, discipline experts versus someone who's an expert in the VR. You're probably very different, but when you come to the table and sort of say, okay, let's just talk and figure this out, then those differences end up being incredibly productive instead of something that would be a barrier. So just a thought, basically. Anything else? Are we okay? Thank you. Thanks a lot. Congratulations.